Chair, we are now live on the Council's YouTube channel.
Thank you very much, Fiona. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Virtual Response and Recovery Committee. Welcome to all those members of the public who are watching on the Council's YouTube channel. My name's Councillor Caroline Kerr, and I'm chairing this evening's meeting. Just a quick word about mobile phones before we start. Can everyone who's present at the meeting make sure that their mobile is on mute or turned off for the duration of the evening? This meeting is being broadcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. A copy of the recording will be available on the channel shortly after the meeting ends. Members and officers are reminded, please, to keep their microphones on mute unless they wish to speak. Members can indicate that they wish to speak by using the chat function, just by typing your name. Please, as always, don't use the chat function for any other purpose, because questions on it won't be answered and the chat function can't be seen by members of the public. So, quick introductions. The councillors who are present are members of the committee. We also have a number of officers present whose cameras are switched off unless invited to advise the committee on the issues before it. So I will just introduce you to the councillors and officers of the meeting. If you could please indicate your presence when I say your name. So first of all, Councillor Tim Cobbett, who's the Vice Chair of this committee.
Yes, I'm here. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Councillor Fiona Bolt.
Good evening.
Councillor Kevin Davis.
Evening.
Good evening. Councillor Lorraine Dunstone.
Good evening.
Councillor Hilary Gander.
Hello, good evening.
Councillor Andreas Kirsch.
Hi, good evening.
Councillor Rebecca Moll. I can see that Councillor Moll is present, but I'm not sure, but I think she may have frozen for a moment, so we'll come back to her. Councillor Maria Netley.
Good evening.
Councillor Anita Shaper.
Good evening.
Councillor Diane White.
Good evening.
And I don't know, Rebecca, if you can hear us. Can you indicate that you're hearing? A little difficulty there. We also have a number of officers in attendance this evening who will give an overview of reports and advice during the meeting. Their cameras and microphones will be off unless they are called to speak. I will just begin with item 1, which is apologies for absence and the attendance of substitute members. So Fiona, are there any apologies or substitutions? Fiona, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear?
Beg your pardon, Chair.
That's okay.
Yeah, I have apologies from Councillors Bass, Davey and Sweeney. Councillor Netley is substituting for Councillor Bass. Councillor Shaper is substituting for Councillor Davey, and Councillor Dunstone is substituting for Councillor Sweeney.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Moll has confirmed that she's here. So I hope that her connection will serve her well for the rest of the evening. And the second item on the agenda is declarations of interest. Members are asked to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests and any other non-pecuniary interests relevant to items on the agenda. Do members have any declarations of interest? Please use the chat function if you would like to speak. And Hilary Gander. Councillor Gander.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to declare a personal interest in that I am a member of Places Leisure by being a member of their leisure centres.
Thank you very much.
I don't think it precludes me from taking part in the debate.
No, but thank you for letting us know. If there are no others, then we'll move on to the minutes. The minutes of the committee's meeting on the 25th of June 2020. Are there any objections to approving these minutes as correct? Unless I see a name in the chat function, I'll assume that they're acceptable and I'll sign those at a convenient moment. So let's move on to item 4, the Communities Task Force Terms of Reference. Councillor Cobbett is going to introduce this item.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm really pleased to be able to bring this item this evening. Before I go on to talk briefly about the paper and the proposal, although it's been repeated, I'm sure, in many other places, it is, of course, worth saying that the whole situation everyone's been in the last few months with dealing with COVID has been it's been a really difficult time for a lot of people in a lot of different ways, and I'm sure all our thoughts are still primarily with everyone who's been affected either directly or indirectly, and it hasn't finished. We're looking towards the recovery, but we're still very much involved in the response as well. Which kind of takes me on to this paper and why we're bringing this forward. I mean, one of the things that was particularly striking during the response was that in order for the response to be effective at getting help to people who needed it, we really needed lots of agencies, lots of partners, individual volunteers, right through to senior staff in the council and councillors to work together. And that had to be thrown together really quickly, but a lot of that was achieved, and the different people involved have spoken about that. But it's really important now that as we do look towards recovery, but also potentially although we hope not, but potentially to further waves of COVID itself, that we don't lose that. We don't simply make that a one-off response and then sort of go back into our separate siloed working now. And that's why a lot of the thinking behind setting up a communities task force is to have a strategic space where both the formal voluntary sector, but also many of the smaller local community groups that have sprung up around the borough and ourselves as the council can work together. And particularly then we've got some strands of work that are referenced in the paper that would be given particular attention. One of those is around how we harness volunteering and that sort of community spirit and help people to do that in the most effective way and feel supported and valued in doing that. There's an area of work around how we actually sort of support the actual voluntary sector in terms of its premises and budgets and ability to keep going after being buffeted by the effects of COVID itself. There's a strand around the equalities impacts of COVID, so particularly looking at how different parts of our communities have been affected in different ways and therefore may need targeted support in relation to that. There's an area also around fostering sort of sustaining the behaviour change, so things like more cycling and walking, as well as the increase in volunteering, street level groups where people are looking out for their neighbours or are more likely to know their neighbours, and actually keeping that going again rather than making it simply a one-off. And also then to look at things that would be a normal part of our work in the council, such as looking at our community assets and some of our processes for volunteering and putting on events and making sure that's as smooth as possible and it's a good experience for those who take part. And we're incredibly blessed in terms of having not only lots of great individual volunteers, but also having strong established organisations like Volunteering Kingston and Kingston Voluntary Action, as well as our health partners such as Health Watch and the local CCG, who we are, many of whom have already confirmed and we're all hoping will be part of this work. And then we'll seek to take representatives from the sort of micro voluntary sector as well. We also hope to take it forward on a cross-party basis in terms of councillors. The intention is, as well as myself as chair, that another councillor from the administration and a councillor nominated from the opposition group would serve on the task force. But my intention is also that the task force is not simply the only place where this work happens. It will be a kind of steering and strategic board that kind of puts the work forward and monitors the work, but a lot of the work will actually take place in the individual work streams, and there'll be opportunities both for community groups and for members to get further involved at that stage of the work as well. I think it's something that we've got no choice but to do. It's not easy to do, and I know that just creating the task force and putting everyone together won't in itself make it happen and solve all the problems, but I think it's an important first step so that we are on the same page and talking together and working together as well as we can be. And it will sit alongside the task force that we commissioned in the last meeting of this committee, looking at economic recovery. So we make sure that the task forces are speaking to the democratic committees within the council and speaking to each other. So we have a joined up approach across this whole response and recovery work. I'll leave it there and hand it back to you, Chair, but I think it may be that Ian Dodds wants to add to my introduction.
If Ian, you would like to introduce the item as well, please feel free.
I don't think that's necessary, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In that case, I will move the recommendation at the front of the report on page 1A. Councillor Cobbett, would you second these recommendations?
Yes, I do second those recommendations. Thanks.
And then I would just ask members who would like to speak to put their name in the chat function, and I see that Councillor Davis has already done so. So, Councillor Davis.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm in general agreement with this item, but there are a couple of things I just would like some clarification on, and just a little bit of help on. I mean, the first of those is that whenever we set up these task groups, I would much rather prefer that they were task and finish, that they had an end date to them, because these things do have a habit of sort of meandering on in this council and never really ever coming to a conclusion. So even if it's not got a finish date, I think at least we ought to be having something come back to the wider committee to understand what is going on within this task force, rather than just expecting it to be done through representation of councillors directly. So just some kind of understanding of that. The other aspect is that I sort of understood that very clearly when it came to the previous task force we set up, because it was clearly economic, and therefore it was obviously going to report back to the Finance and Partnerships Committee once we get out of this particular system that we've got with this response and recovery meeting. But it would be helpful to understand who which committee this is going to report to once this committee has disappeared, because obviously there's an element of adults in this, there's an element of children's in this, and it would just be helpful to understand where is the reporting line once we actually get beyond this, which I hope very soon we're going to get to.
Councillor Cobbett, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, on the point around, I mean, I agree with much of that, really. I mean, on the point about task and finish groups, I would hope that when I was referring to kind of the strands of work within the task force, I was hoping they will very much operate as task and finish groups that are practical action groups to solve a particular problem and then move forward. And it's obviously a good idea with both task forces that we, although councillors will be involved in the work, that we also do have formal reporting back at various stages back into the committee cycle. At this stage, that's very much going to be Response and Recovery Committee, but when we return to regular strategic committees, probably the reality is I think that it will need to go to more than one place, because there'll be a strong element of public health, a strong element of community engagement, and a strong element of adults and children's services as well. So I would expect that when they're back in operation, all of those committees would discuss it from time to time. But a bit like when we discuss the budget, they would focus in on the bits of its work that are relevant to their remits.
Thank you. And I would also just say that the Finance and Partnerships Committee would be a kind of natural home for both committees, I think, to kind of ask for these two task forces to report to. The next person who's asked to speak is Councillor Kirsch.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to highlight again that I think that the task force will be really a good idea, and that I'm glad that we are engaging not just with us officers and members from the opposition, but that we are engaging with members from our community, that we are really working together with our partners and stakeholders in the borough. And so I think this gives us a really unique opportunity to move something forward coming out of this pandemic, and working collaboratively to help our communities to recover. And so I'm really delighted that a couple of stakeholders and partners already have agreed to join. Just to name a few again, which I'm really glad that they are joining the task force: the Kingston Voluntary Action, Love Kingston, Health Watch, and Community Brain.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kirsch. No other councillors are indicating that they would like to speak on this item. Councillor Davis indicated that he does want to speak on it again. Councillor Davis, you're muted.
Sorry, Chair, I forgot to say, and I would be absolutely, he'll kill me if I don't mention it, but our nomination will be Councillor Ian George to sit on this committee.
Thank you very much. Useful to know. Thank you. I would like to ask if we're unanimous on this and we can approve it, or do we need to go to a vote? If anybody feels that they would like a vote, please put your name in the chat function. Otherwise, we will perhaps assume that it's unanimous. Thank you. I think on the basis of no names, we can assume that this has been approved unanimously. So that recommendation is agreed. Let's move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is the local development scheme. Councillor Mole, can you introduce the item, please?
You can hear me?
Yeah, just about.
Brilliant. So, the
Councillor Mole, your connection is very poor. Can I suggest
fairly straightforward? It's basically establishing a work programme. The big thing is the
Councillor Mole, I don't know if you can hear me. I just wonder if you turned your camera off, because it's actually quite hard to hear you. Perhaps the connection will be better.
Chair, can I suggest we could move on to debate another item and see if we could...
Can you hear me now?
Oh, actually, sorry, Fiona. Yes, we can hear you now, Rebecca. Why don't we have a go? Well, as it turns out, we can't hear you, actually. So I'll take Fiona's suggestion and we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is... Bear with me. Which is the street space programme. So, Councillor Gander, would you like to introduce this item?
Yes, hello, hope you can hear me. This item is about, I'll let the officer come in a second, but this item is something which I think is really important. About temporary street space. London is actually creating a lot of space for cycling and walking and for socially distancing at the same time. So it's quite a combination of aims that we have within this programme. Of course, it comes from the top. The government itself has announced the £2 billion package, and only this week has published a paper called Gear Change, a bold vision for cycling and walking, recognising that we need to invest in cycling and walking infrastructure. We needed to anyway, and there was already a programme which TfL was fully supporting and encouraging boroughs to put in place, because for various reasons, for air quality, for people to exercise, and just for sheer capacity of our roads, we need to be engaging in active travel, particularly in London. Now the need is even greater because with public transport capacity severely restricted because of the need for social distancing and for keeping the transport available for key workers, it means that those that might have otherwise been taking public transport need to find an alternative way to travel. So we're very grateful that we have got funding from TfL. Our officers have worked really hard to get that funding to make some changes to our street space. I will let Matt Hill give a proper introduction, and I'm happy to come back later to talk about it some more. But I'd just like to say that I think this is a very necessary program.
Thank you, Councillor Gander. Matt, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Chair. I hope you can all hear me. Yeah, so I suppose to follow on from that with a little bit of the nuts and bolts of the report. So what the report is seeking is authority for officers in consultation with the portfolio holder and affected ward councillors to implement the various schemes that are in the programme and outlined in Appendix A to the report, and also to authorise officers to submit further bids, again in consultation with the chair, to either Department of Transport or TfL, Transport for London, should further funding opportunities arise later in the financial year. And I will update briefly on that because there has been some movement on that since the report was printed. And just to get down to the nuts and bolts, Kingston bid for around £5 million of schemes. The overall pot that was available from TfL for the first 6 months of this financial year was £45 million London-wide. Yeah, as I say, we bid for 5 million and we received just over 2 million. And that's all outlined in Appendix A. And we also received a grant of an active travel grant from the Department of Transport Direct of £100,000, which was available to all London boroughs as well. And those are both for the first 6 months of the financial year. It's probably fair to say that the picture in Kingston is distorted a little bit because of that so that totals 2.235 million that we've been allocated, of which 1.95 million is for completing all of the ongoing but not completed Go Cycle schemes that are on the ground in the borough at the moment. So that takes up quite a considerable amount of the money. Sorry, just before I go and detail the schemes, I should just emphasise that as members will be aware that TfL well documented funding crisis as a result of COVID-19 and the loss of 90% of their fare income. So all of the sort of previous programs that members will be familiar with, including the LIP program, which is worth around £1.5 million to the borough every year, and £3.5 million of Go Cycle money that was allocated to the borough for 2021. All of those programs were suspended. So this Street Space Fund effectively replaces all of those other funding streams. So these are the only funding streams that are open to boroughs from TfL in 2021. As I say, just in terms of the details of the scheme, so there's a completion of 4 schemes that are already on the ground, as it were, for Go Cycle. So that's completion of the Kingston Vale, Kingston Hill scheme, completion of the Station Riverlink scheme and the Station Hub scheme, all of which will be completed pretty much to their full specification, maybe with some slight modifications, and also completion of the Ewell Road scheme, albeit in a cheaper version of a cheaper but also hopefully quicker version of the Ewell Road scheme that is ongoing at the moment. So we're in the process in the moment of redesigning that to reduce the costs of the scheme, where if it's by less civils work, cheaper materials and so on. And this has been a recurring theme obviously through this programme as well. The fundamentals of the programme as far as TfL and the government are concerned is rapid delivery and delivery in temporary or cheaper materials, and also experimentally. So we've also received funding for a number of other experimental schemes. The DfT have granted £100,000 for North Kingston, for both the Kings Road area and the Lower Ham Road area. And TfL have granted £58,000 for some town centre schemes. So that has funded schemes, that's retrospective funding, as it were, for schemes already on the ground. So the social distancing schemes in Kingston Bridge, Clarence Street, and Fairfield North, and also under the railway bridge and Worcester Park, right on the borough boundary with Sutton. £42,000 for a low traffic neighbourhood in the Albert Road area, £46,000 for low traffic neighbourhood in the Kings Road area, and finally £39,000 in the south of the borough for the sort of Roebuck Road area, in the area between the A3, A243 and A240. So with the exception of the schemes that are already on the ground, as I mentioned, and have retrospective funding, all of the other ones, we would seek to put these in as experimental schemes whereby they are implemented in September, because that is a condition of the funding. They'd be implemented under experimental traffic orders, which would, and what that means legally is that there's no need for a public consultation in advance, but the first 6 months of implementation constitute a formal public consultation. So we will be engaging with the public during that first 6 months. And then after those 6 months, if the schemes are to be made permanent, the authority has to formally consider any representations it did receive in that time before deciding whether to make the traffic order permanent or not. The maximum time that the schemes could be on street, as it were, before that decision is taken is 18 months. So after the 6 months of consultation, the authority has up to 12 months to consider the representations and then decide to either make the scheme permanent, modify the scheme, or potentially withdraw the scheme. I think that's probably enough from me in terms of the nuts and bolts of it. And I suggest that that's probably, I'll leave it there for the time being if that's sufficient, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Matt. I'll now move the recommendations at the front of the report on page C1. Councillor Cobbett, are you happy to speak?
Yes, I second the recommendations.
Thank you. And I note that Councillor Davis has already indicated that he'd like to speak on this item. If anybody else would, please put them in the chat function.
Thank you, Chair. Again, like the previous item, I'm generally supportive of this. There's a couple of issues I wanted to raise, a couple of questions I've got about how we're going to go about some of this, which concerns me. I mean, I suppose the biggest concern I've got, and I have raised it with officers before this meeting, is about the whole future of Mini Hollands, because obviously, what we call Go Cycle, because obviously that has been chopped rather dramatically at the minute. It doesn't exist as a scheme anymore, really, apart from the elements that we're trying to implement ourselves through this funding. And I suppose part of this is actually a worry that TfL's funding has been hit very badly by COVID, but I think it's fair to reflect that the way that they've had to continually rephase the funding for Go Cycle, because they were constantly running out of money, has, I think, contributed quite severely to the length of time it's taken us to implement this scheme, because we're now, well, 6 years in, I suppose, is the thing. And I think some of that has been through the lack of good management of finances at TfL well before anything happened around COVID. So that is a concern for me on this particular issue. I also think it is worth reflecting, and I know that Mr. Hill, the officer, did pick this up, but it is also worth reflecting that if you take out the money that's been put in to complete things that we've started on around the cycling, and also then take out the £100,000 that every other local authority got in London, you're then down to about £200,000 of funding we've got here, which doesn't seem, regardless of the crisis, doesn't seem a huge success. And I'm just hoping that we're going to be able to find some more money. And I know that again, the officers are looking at what is coming out of the TfL at the minute, but hopefully we'll be able to pick up some more money for some of these other schemes that are going to be quite important going forward. The other thing I'd say about financing is I do get worried when I start to hear, not that I'm a profligate with money, clearly I'm not, but I do get worried when I start to hear that we're going to cheapen the schemes and make them less expensive than we had intended by less civil engineering, because I'm not sure the evidence that we've had so far of the schemes indicates that slightly softer approach necessarily works. It certainly doesn't keep the cyclist lobby happy if we go down a cheap and I hope this doesn't mean it, but a cheap and nasty approach to implementation, because that would be a little unfortunate given the quality of what we've done up to this date. So I'd hope that wouldn't happen. If I might say, on the specific schemes that we've implemented so far outside of Mini Hollands, I am a little concerned and confused by some of them. I have one in my own ward, which, and I will take this up with officers outside of this meeting, who only yesterday caused virtual gridlock across the entirety of Old Malden from the A3 to Worcester Park. And that was a concern. It wasn't to do with the previous incident the night before. It was actually just to do with this narrowing at the bridge which has gone on. And I think we need to find a way through that. So it would be helpful to have quite a lot of close cooperation with ward members where these things are being implemented. The other thing that worries me slightly is that most of these schemes are involving taking away road space for cars to reallocate. And I understand the context of that, and that is government policy in many respects to do that. So I'm not disputing that's not what's required. But at a time when we're saying also to people at the same time, let's not get on buses and trains and use other forms of transport, for most people that involves getting in their car. So we've already seen car traffic start to get back to where we were prior to COVID. So if we are taking out road space, and that is likely to increase as we move into the autumn, because of course, even the most generous of us would imagine that not everybody who's cycling today in this beautiful weather is going to be cycling when it's pouring with rain in November. So I think there is a balance here. And again, I'm not sure how we intend to manage some of that, which is some of the issue. So I think on the whole, I'm supportive that we get on with this and we do it as required. I'm conscious that we are going to get it come back to us to ratify the implementation of it at a later stage, because it's done as an experimental process now. And just hope that we can get some more money out of TfL to do more around the Go Cycle scheme, because it would be a great shame if we were to now end it and not complete some of those important links which don't yet appear to be funded.
Thank you. Councillor Gander.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll just skip through and probably say something about each of the things that Councillor Davis has mentioned, starting off with the perilous state of TfL, which isn't that new. TfL has had its funding issues before now, but they've been exacerbated obviously by the almost complete stop in fares during the COVID period. So yes, it has been disruptive, but the Go Cycle team have seen their way through, and they did very well to get back in there with highways and to get that funding back, albeit in a smaller version. I'm going to talk about the less civil engineering. There will always be the commitment, and in fact, what the government is insisting on with its new paper that I mentioned, there will always be the protection for cyclists. So as far as the curbs go, which are actually reasonably cheap infrastructure, and we've been using that infrastructure for quite some time now and building the Go Cycle schemes, those curbstones, whatever they're manufactured of, are very easy to bolt in. So just bolting them in and into the road provides that security, that protection, which is the basis of what we're doing, rolling out the safe cycling, safe lanes. So there won't be compromises in that sense, and certainly as far as the major infrastructure such as the river link, that will be completed to absolute safety standards. It's a bridge after all. Obviously, though, in some the more prettification, the type of finish of the pavements, for example, if the pavements don't need redoing, then they won't be redone, etc. Curbs will generally not be moved. Yes, it's going to mean some compromises, but safety will not be compromised. I will say that, yes, the Go Cycle took a huge chunk. It means that I would count it as a huge success. We're, I think, second in the table for how much money we have received in this first tranche. It is disappointing that has undoubtedly meant that we've received less for all the other schemes. So it is disappointing, and all the work that the office is putting in very good bids, which were well received. None of them failed to meet the criteria. They were all good standard, ambitious schemes. We are looking for getting those schemes funded in subsequent tranches, and the next tranche is round the corner. So we're invited to resubmit those very good bids back in again to TfL. And I look forward to seeing several of them particularly keenly. About the Worcester Park narrowing, I'm not a highways engineer, but I stood I have stood there twice watching the traffic, and for such a short distance of making 2 lanes into effectively 1 for cars, I can't see that it's made that much difference. So we need to study it more. We need to see what's really happening. I certainly know whenever I travel down that road, down the Malden Road, it is congested. But it's absolutely our intention to make sure that ward members are involved, that residents are listened to, and that we monitor, observe, and change if we need to what is actually on the ground if it's not working. Yeah, I'll just finish on taking away road space. It is indeed what's declared in this gear change, the report that the government has just issued this week. They are looking for a reallocation of road space. And it's, if we can just get a percentage of people who are currently taking car journeys for short distances to change, that makes a huge difference, because if every one of them is traveling in a car on their own, as soon as you start putting them end to end, that obviously immediately starts to make very much greater car queues, because if each one of them is in a car, it takes up a lot more space than if they're on bikes. And in 2018, 58% of car journeys were under 5 miles long. And 5 miles on a bike is really, really not very far. And as they say in the northwest where I'm from, there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing. I'll leave it there. I think possibly Matt may have some more comments to make.
If Matt wants to come in.
If that's okay, Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much. Matt, do you want to come in? We have a number of other questions.
Yes, please, Chair. Just very quickly, just to follow up on those, just some sort of nuts and bolts stuff, I suppose, to follow up on that. So future Mini Holland, yeah, a very fair question. So just to highlight, we are pursuing other sources of funding as well. So in particular for sort of the Kingston New Malden, which is the kind of next significant scheme that we wanted to deliver and indeed had committee approval for. So we have submitted bids to MHCLG through a different funding package for that scheme. We have been encouraged by TfL to sort of keep that scheme alive, as it were, for future opportunities. So we are hopeful. Just to say, since this report was printed or went to print, if whatever the word is nowadays, we received indication from TfL that they've opened a second round of bidding for £20 million for the second half of the financial year. So we're not clear at the moment whether that's the only opportunity for the second half of the financial year, but we've been given the opportunities to resubmit bids that were submitted last time round, and Kingston New Malden will feature as part of that. We've also, in the last few days, been granted £60,000 of cycle training funding for this year. So that's something we've been pushing for a long time, because that was a casualty of the funding, the LIP funding being withdrawn, which hadn't previously been funded. So we will be able now next term to start back doing cycle training for children, which is welcome news. Just about well, I don't think I can add much to what Councillor Gander said about diluting the benefits, other than to say that you know, the schemes will be very carefully designed, but I guess there is a residual risk there that we do lose some of the benefits. But as Councillor Gander says, I think we will try and focus on maintaining the physical segregation and losing some of the sort of nice to have bits. And on the gridlock and the loss of road space, again, valid points. I would stress that obviously all these schemes, whether they're the ones that have already gone in or the ones that we propose to put in September, will be in temporary materials, so modifications can be made, and indeed schemes can be removed completely, relatively simply, should the need arise. And the one in Worcester Park has indeed had some modifications since it went in, and we continue to monitor that closely. And TfL have provided us with one of the conditions of of the funding for all of these schemes is monitoring. So we have got specific monitoring funding, and we are investing some of that in some additional counting equipment and so on. So yeah, very much I agree that we need to monitor carefully, particularly as you say, one of the things we don't know is how quickly people will return to public transport. We know that traffic levels in many roads have gone very close to 90% perhaps, whereas public transport remains at kind of 20%. So it's a big unknown as to how quickly that will bounce back.
Thank you very much, Matt. Councillor Netley, you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things really. One, I just wanted to ask some questions about what modifications you're looking to make in the town centre, because certainly in the last 3 to 4 weeks with the narrowing of the approach across the bridge, we're constantly seeing serious complaints, and if you just look on Google Maps at any time, you can see some very stark red lines showing traffic congestion coming into the town centre from across the bridge and beyond. And the second question is about the Kingston Station Riverlink. That scheme is already somewhat over running late, and I'd be interested in what the current timescales are for that, because that is quite an important link for encouraging people to be able to get into the town centre in a very safe way. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gander.
Yes, just starting with the second question, this is one of the schemes that has been hit, as Councillor Davies said, with the constant rescheduling of the TfL money. The timescale now it's very, very close. So the timescale now is the end of the year, this calendar year, as I understand it. I'm certainly looking forward to seeing it. I think it's going to be quite an asset to have that cycling and walking segregated facility coming into town that way, straight to the straight from the river to the station. I think it's going to be fantastic. The comment I'm going to make about Kingston Bridge is very similar to what I said about Worcester Park. If we encourage people to get in their cars, then people will get in their cars. If we encourage people that it's safe and there's space for cycling and walking, then people are cycling and walking. We're seeing already the uptake in cycling is everywhere, but we are already seeing it. I think in April, when of course everything was shut down, cycling was up 67% on Portsmouth Road. So the bridge again is a really short stretch. It goes down from 2 lanes to the 1 lane over the bridge for that short period, and then whichever way you go, whether you go left or right, out of town, it's 1 lane each way. So I've had a look. I've seen a red line there too, going out of town and coming into town. Again, it's a short patch where you're coming out of a 1 lane, you're continuing on a 1 lane slightly, and then you get onto the one-way system, which has more lanes. I'm not a highways engineer, but to me that is not the significant factor. The significant factor is the number of people who are choosing to come in by car. And as we know, many of them are not coming from long distances. I don't know what you would, I mean, I'd be interested to know from you, Councillor Netley, whether you think that there is an alternative to doing that, because certainly the modifications have been well received by those who are choosing to walk and cycle. And certainly when I stood there for some time watching what was going on, the vast variety of people on their bikes, families with young children, etc., all types and kinds of cyclists taking advantage of those facilities, and plenty of people walking, of course. I wouldn't want to change that. That to me is a big badge that says, welcome to people who choose to travel sustainably into our town centre. And, you know, we have to remember that we have got an air quality problem. that we're still tackling, and we have to find ways to do that. So I don't mean to lecture by any means. I'm just interested to know what we could do differently, and also that I think we have got to do more to make our town more cycle and pedestrian friendly.
Well, I'm obviously not a highways engineer myself, so I think we just need to keep an eye on it, because again, one of the challenges that we do have is that we are a major retail centre, and the public are being encouraged not to drive, not to use public transport. So if we want to re-attract people from further afield who have in the past used Kingston as a major retail centre, I know it's a fine balance, and I think it's just something we need to keep an eye on, because we do need to look after the business part of Kingston as well as the local residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kirsch.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome the program very much, and we heard a lot about the issues around Go Cycle and the additional space for residents, for cyclists and walkers. And I would like to draw a bit more attention on the other schemes, the smaller schemes which are part of this. And there are a couple of modal filters which we will experiment with, and I'm really looking forward to see these coming in, and I hope that they will be well received by residents. So just looking at the one modal filter suggested for south of the borough would, if it works, would basically close a red run, which heavily influenced on a negative way local residents, because they obviously have been victims to sort of that red run, and hopefully they will benefit and welcome the measure, and it will be hopefully well received. So I'm looking forward how residents engaging with the modal filters, because in general I think it's a really good idea, a really good experiment, and like Matt explained earlier on, it's the other way around of consultation. We're putting it in and having then 6 months to look how it works and what the feedback from residents is. And so I really hope these measures will be making a difference, a positive difference for residents, and will be welcomed.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether Councillor Gander, you want to say anything to that point?
Just that as a borough, I think we could do a lot more with modal filters, with making low traffic neighbourhoods, as they're called now, so that we can take the pressure off those residential areas and in turn make them happy places and safe places to cycle and to walk, and just simply to live, because after all they're residential areas. So yes, I'm really excited that, you know, with the small amount of money that we've got in this round left over after Go Cycle, we're going to create these 3 new low traffic neighbourhoods, and yeah, we need to monitor what happens. If we need to adjust, we will adjust, and yeah, very much looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cobbett.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to touch briefly on the sort of engagement aspect of this. Councillors Gander and Kirsch have already mentioned this to some extent, but Councillor Gander and I are working closely together on this. We sort of understand that this isn't the way that you would normally do things in terms of engagement. Normally you would start from scratch, you'd generate ideas, you'd see what those ideas look like, then you'd put something in. We're having to do it slightly the other way around, because it's emergency funding. You need to act quickly to be able to do anything at all. So it's more a case of testing things out and seeing what works. But I just want to provide reassurance to people that there will be lots of opportunities for people to let us know what they think about what has gone in. And what we're putting in at the moment is very much temporary. I mean, I personally hope that lots of it will prove popular and become permanent. But I would, you know, we really just ask residents to go onto the portal and start letting us know about the schemes in their area, how they could work better, what they like and what they don't like, because that will inform, you know, hopefully a long-term benefit that comes from this initial emergency spending and applications. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gander, did you want to pick that up? I just wanted to pick up something that has been said up to now that I think is sort of based on on slightly outdated government guidance. Government guidance from the 25th of July is actually encouraging people to, if possible, to travel actively by walking and cycling. But if that's not possible, the government guidance now says use public transport or drive. So no priority has been given to cars by the government. And while I would absolutely endorse what Councillor Nettler said a little while ago about the need for economic recovery, and particularly in the town centre, I think we can be ambitious to try to make the town centre a green and pleasant place for people to come to, and we don't have to revert to car travel as the default option. I really think that's a retrograde step. I think Councillor Davis wanted to come back in.
Yeah, it was just to come back on that economic recovery thing, because I mean, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but of course, whether people do drive or don't drive is a matter for them. It's a decision they take. And whilst, I mean, I go across Kingston Bridge probably 5 or 6 times a week, and I don't think there is too much of a problem from what I can see going out of the borough. The issue is coming into the borough, and it's not welcoming for people to come and shop and to actually transact business in the borough. Now, part of the problem here is that we have shut down one of those lanes, and one of those lanes is effectively a queue for the car parks to John Lewis. And so we're now putting all the traffic through one lane. And it is actually, I mean, again, I'm not a highways engineer, but I've stood and looked at it, and it is entirely unnecessary, because that lane coming into the borough that we've closed is not being used by cyclists or pedestrians. They're all choosing, as they always have, to be the other side of the road, on the avenue, the bit coming out. And that's because when you get the other side of the bridge, there's nowhere to go, because you either have to go into John Lewis or you have to cross a main road to get back to the other side to get round. So all I'm saying is I think we just need to be very careful about how we implement these things, because they can, what seem small changes have very disproportionate effects. And at the minute, we've got a very, very fragile economy in the borough with the changes that are happening with retail. And if we're not careful, we're just going to make it even more difficult for people to come and go. And although I accept that people who live close to the town can easily come in by cycle or public transport, that's not true of everybody that comes into the town. There is still a significant number of people, because we are a metropolitan centre. We're not some little village sort of green with a nice sort of shops. We are actually a metropolitan centre in London, and we've got to make it easy for everybody to get in and out of the town, and not just think by shutting off lanes that we're going to make it a better place.
Yes, I know what you mean, Councillor Davis. And I think my own preference would be to make the facilities on the other side, on the Kingston side, if you like, make them two-way as they were when they were original. And I think that's eminently possible. It's a conversation I've had with officers already, and you know, your feedback will add to that. You know, I'm sure we've had it as well from residents. It's something that's being actively looked at, like with all the schemes, we're looking at how we can improve them. I wouldn't say, you know, absolute that nobody uses that side. I did see a family and some other people cycling on that side. And if you think about it, when the river link is built, wouldn't it be great to be able to come in from Hampton Wick, scoot over the bridge, go safely through the underpass, and then somehow, it then gets a bit more difficult, and this is where we need highways engineers, get to that river link. That is a route that people may well want to take, but at the moment that's not possible, so perhaps that's stretching a bit too far. But anyway, yeah, it's under review. Perhaps with permission, Chair, I don't know whether Matt Hill has anything he wants to add from an officer perspective.
Matt, do you have anything to add?
I mean, just quickly, Chair, to echo Councillor Gander's comments there. You know, the scheme is under close review. We do monitor it. We certainly wouldn't make it more permanent without very careful consideration. And just to stress as well, we're in close contact with. So we have a highways engineer, not myself, I might add, on the council's officer working group about reopening the town centre. And he is in close contact with Kingston First and with John Lewis and Ben Tools as well. So we're sort of well plugged in, if you like, with the business community in the town centre. So they you know, are absolutely, that line of communication is open to make sure we hear that perspective as well. And I agree, it is a balance that needs to be struck. That's probably about as much as I need to say, but it's something that we are monitoring closely.
Thank you very much. Since nobody else has asked to speak on this item, I suggest that we decide whether or not we need to go to a vote. I would be happy if we could agree it unanimously. If anybody disagrees with that, please could they put their name in the chat function. I'm taking from that we are happy to agree this unanimously. So unless I hear otherwise, that recommendation is agreed. I suggest that at this point we should go back to the previous item and see if we can hear from Councillor Moll. So I'd like to return to the local development scheme, and I hope Councillor Moll can join us by phone.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Brilliant. I can introduce it, but you can't see me. So the local development scheme, it basically does what it says on the tin, sets out the timetable for delivering the key planning documents. The biggest of these is the new local plan, which will set out the overall development strategy for the borough for the period to 2041. There have been significant changes to the planning system in the period since the last LDS was approved in 2019, most notably the publication of the revised National Planning Policy Framework and the completion of the examination in public of the new London Plan. And so this new updated LDS covers the period from spring 2020 to summer 2023. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure if an officer wants to add anything to that.
No, nothing to add. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tim. In that case, I will move the recommendations at the front of the report on page B1. And Councillor Cobbett, are you happy to second them?
Yes, I second them, yes.
Thank you very much. If anybody wishes to discuss this item, please put your name in the chat function. And if not, I don't see any names going in. Oh, sorry, Councillor Davis, go ahead.
It was just a brief comment that I don't have a problem with this timetable. It seems fine, but I suppose it's a lesson for all of us, and this is not a political point on the council, that probably 12 years is too long to have a local plan in place without revising it significantly. And I know we've been waiting for the London plan to formulate and all those sorts of things, but it seems to me planning and housing is moving so fast at the minute, and things are changing so quickly, not least what the government's up to, that by the time we get to 2023, this thing could be out of date if we're not careful. And it's just I think for everyone to learn a bit from this.
Thank you. I don't know whether you want to pick that up, Councillor Moll.
Yes, I mean, it is a very much needed document. I think it's been recognised throughout the previous administrations as well, and we are keen to get this done to produce and keep a good borough for our residents.
Sorry, I was mute. And thank you very much, Councillor Moll, and I think Tim Naylor would also like to speak.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Yeah, just to say that it's a fair point, and the government now requires authorities to review their development plan every 5 years now. So any document that constitutes the development plan, so that'll be the South London Waste Plan and the local plan when it's published, and then any sort of supporting area action plans as well, we're required to review every 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Since there seem to be no other councillors who want to contribute to this item, I would suggest again that I'd like to just put this through unanimously unless anybody objects. And so please, if you object, could you put your name in the chat function now? I'm taking it then that that recommendation is agreed. So thank you very much. Let's move on now to item 7, which is the review of warding arrangements, the response to the Boundary Commission. Councillor Cobbett.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to this item, I'd like to draw everyone's attention to the fact there are a couple of bits of late material. So you already had what is essentially the draft of what the council is proposing to put into the Boundary Commission at stage 3, but you've now also got some visual representations of what that would mean. The wards would look like if the Commission took up our recommendations, and then you've also got some additional information around school places, which we hope kind of supports the argument for the changes the changes to the Commission's current recommendations that we're proposing. Just to give a bit of context, it's essentially a sort of once in about every 20 years exercise whereby local government boundaries are reviewed. They're reviewed by an independent commission, and basically the Local Government Boundary Commission, essentially a government quango, and they look mainly at electoral equality and trying to make sure there's a broadly similar number of voters in each ward, but they also look at factors around community identity and sort of where people think they live and what makes a natural and cohesive community. We've gone through a couple of years of this already. At stage 1, there was unanimous agreement across the council that we felt we should stay at 48 members. The Commission agreed with that and has sort of built that then into the plans from that stage onwards. Then at stage 2, we were invited to put proposals in as to what the warding arrangements to support that should look like. And there was a proposal put in by the council. There were other proposals put in by other local political parties and also by residents groups and individual residents, are often focusing on one particular area of the ward map. The Commission then studied that for a time being and came up with some proposals. And in quite a number of areas, what we had submitted previously has been built in by the Commission into their recommendations, but in other areas, they went with some of the other submissions and proposals that they received. This is now the last opportunity, both for the council, but also all other stakeholders and for residents to sort of influence the process. And you're invited basically to say what you think of the Commission's current recommendations. So in our draft response, we've sort of outlined that, and in many areas we have said that we are happy with what's currently proposed and given reasons for that. But in a small number of areas, we've suggested why we feel that a different option should be taken. In 2 particular areas, we have suggested different boundaries. One is the boundary between Norbiton and the proposed New Malden West, which moves the boundary further towards New Malden. The other more substantial changes around that we're proposing to the Commission is that Berrylands expands and takes in some territory that currently is proposed to be in Surbiton Hill and becomes a 3-member ward, with a resultant knock-on effect in where the boundary would be between Surbiton Hill and the Tolworth Town ward. But both of those cases, that's around, our understanding of what the community identity is for the residents concerned and where they feel they live and where they feel their areas look towards. We also have 2 areas where we've suggested a different name for the ward. One down south of the borough in Chessington South, particularly to enable Malden Rushet to have their name recognised and in the ward map, and also around one of the North Kingston wards has proposed change of the name to Parkside. So really the proposal is that we put this forward. The Commission will then consider it alongside everything else that they receive and ultimately make a decision. The next stage, the next time we deal with this in the council, we'll be dealing with actually making it a reality in terms of dealing with our electoral registers and polling places and so on. But this is the last opportunity to influence what the wards actually look like, and hopefully it speaks for itself why we've suggested the changes that we have. But obviously all we're doing here is suggesting them to the Commission. The Commission will have to make its own mind up about whether they take them on board or not. I'll hand back to you, Chair, and Gary Marson may also want to add to what I've said.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cobbett. Gary, did you want to add anything?
Thank you, Chair. I don't think I have anything to add at this stage to Councillor Cobbett's introduction.
Thank you very much. Then at this point, I'll move the recommendations at the front of the report on page D1, and I'll ask Councillor Cobbett to second that.
I do second the recommendations.
Thank you very much. And I see that Councillor Davis would like to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I just to be very upfront about this, we're not going to be supporting this. This is well, you know, we went through this before with the submission at the previous stage, but now we seem to have got to a situation where the council, or rather the Liberal Democrats, because of course nobody else agreed with it, agreed a scheme at the previous stage and submitted it. But now then wants to rip up that scheme as well as the Commission scheme to create yet another scheme. And I just don't see that the Commission is going to be fooled by it. I mean, it's a bit of a mess, really. I mean, the bit that, I mean, you know, as the Commission itself made clear, the area of Alpha Road, which is what seems to be at stake at the Surbiton end, could be on either side of that, could be in either one of those wards. It's not clear cut either way. And in fact, historically, before the 2000 redrawing of the boundaries, between 1965 and 2000, Alpha Road Estate was always in Surbiton Hill. So it's not as clear cut as it appears, I'm afraid. But the bit that really does stand out for me is the issue of Tolworth, that you've chopped it now and created a 2-member ward for Tolworth with a 2-member ward in Alexandra. So effectively Tolworth Broadway, which is probably one of the top 3 areas in the borough most in need of regeneration, and which is going to get the most housing put into that area. I mean, we're talking possibly 1,500 new homes over the course of the next 5 or 6 years within the plan period which the Commission is looking at. And we're saying that it's right that they only have 2 councillors in Tolworth and 2 in Alexandra. So the thing is just ill-conceived in my view, and it doesn't seem to make much sense. And when you look at the electoral variations that you now are committing yourselves to, they're so far out from where the Commission started that, again, I find it very difficult to understand how that's going to work, in my view. It is only my view, it's down to the Commission. I just think it would be better in a way if the Liberal Democrat Party wants to put in a scheme that it did it itself rather than try and go through this sort of quasi route, because it's quite often that councils don't submit schemes to the Boundary Commission, and it would have been a sensible way to do this time. In North Kingston, well, I mean, we preferred the scheme that we came up with, but we're very accepting of the fact the Commission has decided to go the route it was. We thought that having a complete river-facing wall was quite a novel way of around that, so I don't have any issues around that. We will be objecting to the changes between the Norbiton ward and the rather ugly name New Malden West, which is not really the best name for it. And the reason for that actually is very interesting, because the reason we object to you moving that bit out of Norbiton is for precisely the same reason that you want to move the boundary in the additional information you've shared with us this evening on Surbiton, in the Surbiton Hill ward. And that's because the majority of the children that go to the school you want to push into New Malden actually live in Norbiton, when you look at the pattern of where they come from. So it's exactly the same reasons, in a sense, that I don't think it's a necessarily clever idea. I mean, one of the things that's going to be very interesting for all of us, actually, is how this does come out, because one of the considerations we're going to have to make is how we structure the neighbourhood committees going forward, because as it stands at the minute, we can't possibly continue with the existing committees based on the ward structure that's currently being presented to us. So there's going to have to be some considerable thought given to how that comes about. So that's me. I have been asked, and I know I'm going to get hung, drawn and quartered if I don't mention it. I have been asked by Councillor Sharon Sumner to add her view that this was not the correct approach. She wanted to read a statement out committee, but for very good reasons, that's not possible. But she, like us, objects to the area around Surbiton Hill, Berrylands and Tolworth, and thinks it's a very poor solution. And it's her words that it just seems to be an attempt to gerrymander the awards around there, and there doesn't seem any sense to it, particularly that we can identify that really stacks up. I don't think she has many objections to anything else that's going on. It's just those particular areas, and she has a similar concern around Tolworth and how that is represented in the future, because it's such an important area. We seem to have overrepresented Surbiton and underrepresented Tolworth by the things that we're now trying to do, or rather you're trying to do, with the Commission this evening. So that's our view.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davis. Councillor Cobbett, would you like to pick up any of those points?
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and there's a few different things there, but I'll try and pick them up as best I can. One was around, do we need to put in a submission as the council? Because obviously one option is, you could simply put a submission in as a political party, and the council could say nothing. But my understanding of these processes is that it is generally expected by the Commission that councils do, although it's not a requirement, it's generally expected that councils do put in a submission to these processes. And I felt it was important that, the local authority itself, through our democratic process, did take a view directly. But obviously that in itself doesn't mean that our submission is more important than all the other submissions that the Commission will receive, because they will look at them all on their own merits. There was a point around arguing against what we'd said previously. I mean, my understanding of what we're saying here is essentially in the limited numbers of areas where we are arguing that the boundaries should be different to what's currently proposed by the Commission, which are only a limited number of areas. In most areas, we're accepting of what the current recommendations are. But when we are arguing for something different, where we are in essence making a similar argument to we made the last time, but in areas where for one reason or another our attempts weren't successful at convincing the Commission on the previous occasion. Now we may or may not be successful this time either, but it's not in a sense surprising that we sort of still think what we thought previously. I take the point that a lot of these boundaries can be argued one way or the other, and there's not an absolute right or wrong to it, but you try and get a sense from the local members and from local community groups how they see it, and try and come to a view, particularly around Alpha Road. That's been strongly influenced by the views that the Alpha Road Residents Association have put forward, very much saying they see themselves as connected to Berrylands and Berrylands facing, and that's kind of shaped our thinking there. On the other points, I mean, it is of some regret to me that we couldn't quite find a way to get all of the sort of central and bit of the Tolworth Borough together in one ward. At the start, we were looking for a way of doing that, but there are so many competing things you're looking to achieve in these processes. It was quite hard, having made some other decisions, to find a way of doing that that also kept us sufficiently within the numbers. But of course, Tolworth itself will not only be represented by those two councillors, because there will also be, councillors representing Alexandra, which includes parts of Tolworth, and indeed King George's and Sunray. It includes the Sunray estate, if you regard that as Tolworth. I take the point about the name New Malden West. It was one of the other ones where we were sort of searching around for a different name, but nobody has come up with one that anyone thought was any better. But if anyone happens to have up their sleeves a better name that would sum up that area, we could have a look at it now, because obviously changing the names doesn't change the rest of the submission and the lines in the map in of itself. The last point was around, I think Kevin Davis was indicating he does have an idea, so we'll see in a minute what it is. But the last point was about neighbourhoods. Yes, I mean, we will need to think about neighbourhoods. I mean, I've tried to not make this process mainly about neighbourhoods, but once we know what the wards are, clearly those wards need to be grouped into neighbourhoods if we're going to run the neighbourhood system. I mean, my own preference is probably that actually in some cases, the neighbourhoods would be more cohesive if they were slightly smaller. For example, in my neighbourhood, that actually spans a very broad area when you've got people right across from Old Malden to Coombe Hill. But obviously I know there are resource implications if you were to do that, because you have to actually support the operation of neighbourhoods as entities. So that would have to be argued on its merits at the time. But I think I'll leave my comments there.
Thank you very much. I think Councillor Davis is itching to get back in with a name.
I don't know about itching. I'm not sure I myself would want to be known as the councillor of a Hogsmill ward, but the actual historic name of that area is Norbiton Park, believe it or not. And that dates back probably 200 years. And in fact, as a ward, it was called Norbiton Park until about the late 80s, I think it was, or early. It was certainly the boundary change before this. So Norbiton Park is what it technically is.
Personally, I think that could be a bit confusing, but that's thank you for the suggestion, and we will take it away. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this item? If not, we could move to a vote. I suspect that on this one we may not have unanimity. I don't know. Nobody else has indicated they would like to speak. If you would like a vote, please put your name in the chat. Yeah, thank you. So Councillor Davis has indicated that he would like a vote. So I'll ask Fiona, please, to ask each member how they wish to vote.
Thank you, Chair. I will now do a roll call. Councillor Cobbett?
For.
Councillor Bolt?
For.
Councillor Davis?
Against.
Councillor Dunstan?
For.
Councillor Gander?
For.
Councillor Kerr?
For.
Councillor Kirsch?
For.
Councillor Moll?
For.
Councillor Netley?
Against.
Councillor Shaper?
For.
Councillor White?
For.
Thank you, Chair. That is carried with 9 in favour and 2 against.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I was going to suggest, because this is going to be quite a long evening, that we take a break, but perhaps we could try to do the next item and then break after that, if that works for everyone. So item 8, section 75, deed of variation, which I should point out has a confidential annex and also has had some late material circulated today. Can I ask Councillor Fiona Bolt, please, to introduce the item?
Thank you, Chair. This agenda item is seeking approval of a variation in the terms of the Section 75 partnership agreement between Kingston and the CCG. The partnership agreement is an expression of integrated working between the two bodies. The current partnership agreement was entered into 2017 and amended in 2018. The review of the terms of the agreement has been going on for the past year, but there's been a delay in finalising the terms of the amended agreement owing to delayed issuance of new statutory guidance and then the onset of the COVID-19 outbreak, which obviously all the attention of the parties was concentrated on dealing with the crisis. The Section 75 agreement funds vital services through the Better Care Fund, which provide essential support for people with health and social care needs, including older people, people with disabilities and those with mental health problems. The Better Care Fund also funds a number of voluntary organisations promoting community resilience. The variation of the terms of the Section 75 agreement will allow statutory services to continue to be delivered effectively and will allow time for a complete review of the partnership agreement with a view to entering into a new Section 75 agreement for 2021-22 that will deliver further efficiencies and quality improvements in the future. And yes, there is late material concerning amendments to the timetabling for the new agreement and some additional financial information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether an officer would like to add anything to Fiona Bolt's comments.
I don't think that's necessary, Councillor Kerr. It's Helen Coombs here.
Thank you, Helen. That's great. In that case, I'd like to move the recommendations at the front of the report on page E1 and ask Councillor Cobbett to second them.
Yes, I second them.
Thank you. And I think Councillor Davis would like to speak on this item.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question which I'm generally happy with. It's just a question which relates to the exempt item, but I'm not going to mention any figures. So I'm just going to ask a question about the figures for the explanation. And the figure that I'm interested in relates to children's on this piece of additional information, because my understanding was that we were expecting to see an uplift in funding for children's to do with some of the, I don't remember what the name of it was now, some of the SCN children. We were looking for some extra funding from the CCG as part of our plan. And that doesn't appear to be reflected here because we've only appear to have a very small increase in funding for the CCG under the children's bit of this. So it's really a question about that, but that was all I had to say about it.
Thank you. Councillor Bolt, would you like to answer?
Yes, I can give you a little bit. I mean, basically, I think there are some additional monies there for children's therapies, but some services were discontinued. So the overall amount seems maybe a little bit less, but I think maybe Councillor White might be able to add a bit more detail on that.
Sorry. Not a lot of detail. I'm really sorry to add on that. It's the therapies I think that Councillor Davis is referring to, and there is additional funds coming in for that. I have to say, I was slightly surprised by that as well. So I do think that's something that I'll have to take away and come back, and happy to bring back a response to everybody, particularly Councillor Davis. Thanks.
Thank you very much. If there are no other questions, then perhaps we can we take this as a unanimous item? If anybody would wish a vote, please put your name in the chat function. Otherwise, I will assume that this is an item that will go through unanimously. I think that we can assume that that's the case and that these recommendations have been approved. So it's 20:51, and I propose that we have a short break now and come back, should we say, at 9:05? Would that be acceptable to everyone? So, okay, so thank you very much. We'll have a short adjournment so that people can have a comfort break, and then I'll see everyone back here at 9:05. Thank you. it's restarted. Fiona, you're on mute.
Yes, Chair, I've just done. We are live.
Great, thank you very much. So welcome back, everyone. We're moving now to item 9, the contract for the provision of temporary agency resource, and Councillor Cobbett is going to introduce this item.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this paper outlines, it's not the procurement itself, but it outlines the approach that we intend to take to procuring our partners for securing agency staffing resource over the next 3 years, with the option to extend for a further year. As the paper explains, there is a kind of national buying framework for this kind of service, and then there is a sort of London consortium within that. The recommendation is that we continue with being part of that those national and London frameworks, but that we opt for a different lot, which would ultimately give us a different provider within the options we've got within that. And that's why the second recommendation is for an extension to the contract that we already have, because it's clearly important that there is smooth operations in this area, and there is not a time left where we're unable to secure the resource that we need. So the idea is that the existing contract be extended to cover that, and then we can have a planned phasing in of the new provider. The paper kind of details what the reasons are for taking this approach, as opposed to other approaches like bringing the service in-house or doing nothing, or recontracting from recommissioning from scratch outside of the national and London frameworks. And also goes into some detail about why we think it is a good idea to opt for a different lot within the packages that we've got available. And there's two main reasons really for that. One is around value for money and for our spend, without sort of compromising the quality of the support that we're able to bring in when we need it. That's essentially because the key difference is the provider that we would end up with through this route acts solely as a placer of staff and a recruiter and someone who will find the staff for us, whereas the current arrangement sees us working with a partner that both itself is a recruitment agency and places staff as well as sourcing staff for us. And we think there'll be added value for us in changing that. But we also are interested in what we can get in terms of social value. So that's around the ability to work in a partnership way to sort of prioritise local jobs, and working with our local job centre plus, particularly around skills and the long-term unemployed, and to try and maximise that aspect of the contract. So I'll probably I'll leave my remarks there for now, but either Sarah or Ali Littlewood may want to add to what I've said.
Chair, we're happy to take questions and support Councillor Cobbett's comments.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Councillor Cobbett. I see that Councillor Davis has got a question.
It's not a question; it's just a point, really, and it is a political one, which is that your manifesto committed to reducing the spend on agency staff, and you're now spending more than we were spending at the end of 2018.
Councillor Cobbett.
Thanks, Chair. So, I mean, two things there. In terms of the contract process itself, although the contract has an estimated value, it's not a minimum spend for us. So obviously, we should be trying to drive down the amount of agency resource we need. We're always going to need it because of the nature of the areas that we operate on, but we should be getting as much value for that as possible, minimising it to the extent that we can. But there's nothing in the contract arrangements that would stop that work from taking place. In terms of the point around the agency spend, the figures around what we were spending on agency staff in the last financial year are around particular challenges that we faced. You know, we've had areas of the council where we have been, you know, restructuring or looking to turn around and do transformation in that service area. That often does mean that in the short term, you spend on agency staffing while you're coming up with deciding and recruiting to that structure. But it's not the intention for that to be the ongoing situation. It should be a case of spending in order to utilise savings, because you actually get the right structure or improve the performance of that area of the council later on by doing that work. I don't know whether Sarah or Ali wish to add to that.
Chair, all I would say, as you know, the main thing is that we will always need agency and interim resources. Last year was a challenging year for the issues that Councillor Cobbett set out, but it's always our intention to ensure that when we do use agency and interim resources, it's the value for money, that we get it at the best value, we get the right outcome, and we ensure as quickly as possible that we move to removing that agency or interim resource when it's not needed, and I will continue to update the committee on that.
Thank you, Sarah. Is there any other councillor who'd like to speak on this? If not, then shall we move to a vote, or if people are happy to agree to this, we can put it through unanimously. Please let us know, please let me know in the chat function if you'd like it to go to a vote. If not, then I'm going to take it that that item has been passed unanimously, and therefore the recommendations have been approved. So let's move on in that case to item 10 on the agenda, which is mechanical street cleansing recycling services contract, and it's back to Councillor Gander.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, this is about the street sweepings being able to be recycled. Apparently up to 70% of the street sweepings can be recycled, up to 1,500 tonnes per annum. And we would very much like to chip away and to be recycling more. At the moment, the street sweepings go to residual waste and are treated at the Beddington Energy to waste from energy site. And what this is about, it's a proposal to not only save money by recycling, but to environmentally save as well. So to go for a procurement for new services to recycle this material. That's it.
Thank you. I don't know if there's an officer who would like to add anything to that. If not, are there any councillors who would like to speak on this item? I'm not seeing any takers. Can I assume then that we're happy to put this item through? If anybody would like it to go to a vote, please put your name in the chat function now. Okay, I'm going to assume then that that has been passed unanimously, so the recommendations have been approved. Thank you very much. Let's move on then to item 11 on the agenda. Sorry, trying to find it, which is the recommissioning of Achieving for Children and the review of company governance. Councillor White.
Thank you very much, Chair. We've been discussing this for quite some time now, so I think it'd be really good to note our decision made by Case last December to apply the 5-year extension and then move on from here. We acknowledge AFC's outstanding delivery of our children's services, but at the same time, there was some minor contract variations that we would really like to see to reflect each sovereign council's priorities. This work was going ahead extremely well, but the pandemic has caused it to be paused. And I would say it's realistic now that we accept that the changes will be implemented by April 22 rather than April 21. It will also allow us to reflect actually on the learning from the COVID response. And I'm very clear that there'll be no negative impact on the children and young people of our borough. The transfer of functions of company governance from the Joint Committee to our Children's and Adults Care and Education Committee is also welcome, because this will allow us more scrutiny and decision making. And lastly, I'd like to say that throughout this process, we've been working very closely with Richmond, and I'm looking forward to our cross-borough, cross-party workshops that are going to start in October. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor White. I don't know if Ian Dodds would like to, or Sarah Ireland would like to speak?
No, just to say we have nothing to add to Councillor White's introduction, and myself and Janine are here to take any questions.
Thank you very much. And I think that Councillor Netley and then Councillor Davis would like to speak. So Councillor Netley first.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just one question really. Because the timescales for this are being pushed out, and we all understand why those timescales have been pushed out. I'm just interested that in the paper that it actually says 1st of April 2022, amending contract specification and schedules adopted. Given that a lot of this work is actually going to significantly enhance the working practices between AFC and the council, I'd like some reassurance actually that that isn't a hard and fast, and when these agreements have been set in stone, they may not be finalised within the contract, but because of the nature of the partnership working, I'd like some reassurance that these will be adopted as soon as practical, as opposed to waiting until a deadline date of April 2022. Thank you.
Can I?
Please.
Yeah, thank you. I think, yes, I see that there, but I think if you read through the narrative, it does make that very clear that that is actually the end date by which all specification schedules will be adopted. So that's very much, as you say, as things come along, as we're able to, things are implemented, and that is just the final. It's a little bit like we said earlier, task and finish. This is a finish date by which we'll have achieved everything.
Thank you very much. Councillor Davis.
Thank you. It was a similar sort of question, but really from a financial point of view, because I'm assuming, I may be wrong, and I may have misunderstood this, that the renegotiation was leading to some budget savings which would have been made, and yet when it gets to paragraph 17, which talks about financial context, it's got some broad words about the financial context of the council, but doesn't give any indication of the financial implications of having to defer this for a year. So just, I mean, maybe there's nothing, but it'd be good to have some comfort, because I thought part of this was trying to help us reshape our budget around this particular area.
I'm going to go to Janine for that in just a moment, but it's part of what we're trying to do is try and make the contract, rather than about finance, but about the quality of what's been offered, and making it more Kingston based alongside Richmond as well. So there are certain areas that perhaps were a little bit loose in the original contract that we would like to make sure. For example, our children and young people with SEND is a huge priority for us, and maybe not quite so much for Richmond, although that's for Richmond to answer. So I think it's tightening up areas like that more is what we're working on at the moment. But if I can possibly ask Janine or Sarah for their point of view, please.
Thank you, Councillor White. Thank you, Chair. I think the issue is that on an ongoing basis, budget savings are driven out by the budget setting process on children's services. So there were no direct savings related to this. But what was very important, that we got that risk balance right. I think despite the contract from when I've been here, that relationship and that ownership of the budget and the financial issues relationship wise has happened, and I think we've seen that come through in what's been delivered. But I think what we do need to do, Councillor Davis, is make sure that we embed that in the contract, because we shouldn't just rely on relationships. So that's the big thing. So it's not just budget savings, and we would be seeking for that to be done sooner than later, in the way that Councillor White said about things being ready as soon as we have them. That'll be the focus.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, then I suggest that anyone who would like, if you would like it to go to a vote, as usual, could you put your name in the chat? Otherwise, I'm going to make the assumption that this might go through unanimously. That seems to be a safe assumption, so I'm declaring that those recommendations have been approved. Let's move on now to item 12, which is the reopening of leisure services. And I would like to ask Councillor Kirsch to speak to this item.
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to highlight again that this item also has an exempt annex. With the approval of this item, RBK would provide a support and contractual relief package for our leisure provider, which is Places Leisure, All our leisure facilities have been closed on 18th of March and have not operated since. COVID-19 had a profound impact on the whole leisure sector across the country, which is facing now severe financial difficulties. Whilst other sectors have had rescue packages from the government, this is so far not the case for the leisure sector, and RBK has contractual commitments with its leisure provider Places Leisure. The current contract has been extended and negotiated in 2017 by the previous administration, and in the spirit of partnership and to continue to provide leisure facilities for our residents, RBK has agreed on a support and contractual relief package for Places Leisure to cover the period of the closure and to cover the recovery period from when they reopen till spring 2021. Sorry, final details on the package will be concluded imminently, and hence, as they are not concluded, you have the exempt annex for this item. So far, many residents have contacted RBK and councillors from all benches about the reopening of our leisure provisions, as many of our residents are keen to restart their exercise activities again. We all know that regular physical exercise is a huge contributor for physical and mental well-being. RBK is keen to get the facilities reopened as soon as possible, and Places Leisure aims to reopen the facilities mid-August. Hopefully tomorrow we are in the position to announce exact dates, and we are keen that Places Leisure might find it manageable to open some facilities earlier, or at least the athletic track earlier. We are working towards this goal, and hopefully very soon residents can enjoy our leisure facilities again whilst feeling safe and helping keeping others safe during this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kirsch. I'm not sure if there's an officer who would like to add to that.
Chair, there's nothing to add, but we're happy to take questions, and Charlotte is here as well.
Thank you very much. I see that Councillor Davis has a question.
Chair, it's not really a question, it's more of just a comment on this. I think it's fairly straightforward. I don't think there's a great deal really to discuss at this stage. I mean, obviously this paper's been forwarded because there's a meeting, but we don't actually know what's been negotiated yet, so it's a bit difficult to pass too much judgment on it. I think the only thing I would say to you at this stage is that whilst it's right that we get the centres open as soon as we possibly can, and I understand why this is again, this isn't a political point. I understand why it's taken longer than some boroughs. In fact, most boroughs in London seem to have already got theirs open, and it's just taking longer for us. And I think that's regrettable, but it's the nature of where we are with this particular contract, I think. But I would add that central to me for all this is the position of the Kingfisher, because whilst we may well get them open, it's quite possible that the losses that they're incurring could continue well beyond the dates that we are being led to believe are the set dates at the minute for when the existing funding would last till. And so there's obviously some concern that we do get a report back, possibly at the very next time that we meet, about where those negotiations have got to, because obviously there's a significant budget impact if we're not very careful around this whole thing. And when it comes to the Kingfisher, I understand that there's yet another survey going on the building, but I do think we have to face up to the fact that the Kingfisher, even if it had a roof on it, is not a great leisure facility. It's old-fashioned. It's got a wave machine, which in 1980 was probably a really popular thing. I was never really a fan of it myself, but that's possibly because I didn't surf. But but the point is, I think we may be coming to the stage where even if the costs of repairing the Kingfisher are de minimis, you know, even if they're only $500,000, which I can think is going to be a lot more than that if we are having to replace a roof, then we need to already start taking that decision and having those debates about how we replace it, because we have as a council already adopted a strategy around I call it wet sports. I don't think it's quite called that, but there is a strategy around sport in this context, which is saying that we need 4 swimming pools across the borough. and we currently only have one, and even that's quite small and nowhere near capable of taking the demand from either the clubs or even individual swimming. So I think I'm saying is that it would be helpful if in the very early autumn we could have a bigger debate about this, because I do think we are coming to the stage where we need to start saying we need a new swimming pool in Kingston.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davis. I will pass back to Councillor Kirsch, but I'd just like to pick up a couple of things. You mentioned that other boroughs had opened. Most of the boroughs who've opened have different arrangements from ours. Wandsworth, which also is contracted to Places Leisure, has not opened and is unlikely to open even as early as we are. And you mentioned this is not a great contract, and I don't wish to be political, but it is a contract we inherited from your administration. And on the Kingfisher, I agree that a decision.
Sorry, it's not actually. It dates back way beyond our administration.
Your administration chose to extend the contract to 2026. So
yeah, with some benefits we derived from it.
Well, we might argue about how clever that contract was and extending it, whether that was a very smart decision. In terms of the Kingfisher, I agree that we need to come to a decision, and as soon as we have all the information available, that is going to be a discussion that we need to have. Councillor Kirsch, would you like to pick up?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Davis, for your comments. And I agree, it's regrettable that it takes that long. But like the leader already mentioned, there are other boroughs who faring even worse, and Richmond, who is doing their in-house, they are opening soon, roughly around the same time most probably than we would open. So the latest information for Richmond, who do it in-house, I had. They want to be open their outdoor pool on the 3rd of August, but their gyms, studio and indoor pools at the 10th of August. And so that would be roughly around the time frame we are looking forward for us. And other of their provisions, Teddington Sports Centre and Sheen Fitness Centre and the Lincoln Fields will not open before the 17th of August. So we are roughly in line with Richmond here as well. Nevertheless, that does not deflect from that. It's still regrettable, and that we hope that we can agree with Places Leisure to open earlier, but that is obviously subject to the how we can move this. And on Kingfisher, again, I agree with what he said and what the leader said, and we are looking into this. We are obviously awaiting eagerly the latest survey to see how severe the issues and the structure are and the roof are and what the cost implications are. And then surely this will come back as soon as possible to the R&R committee, and then we will debate the future of the Kingfisher Centre.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kirsch. And I think that the Chief Executive would like to speak.
Yeah, thanks, Leader. And it is regrettable. I understand people's frustrations here, but let's not forget that people's habits have changed as well, and the demand for leisure has changed through the COVID experience, and people are finding different ways of keeping active and keeping fit. So every decision that we take needs to be absolutely cognizant of the financial implications here. We need to think about leisure and the demands within the medium term, and the medium term financial impact needs to be assessed also, given that, as I said previously, demands for leisure services of this type have changed. We're going to have to review that very, very carefully with our communities to ensure that we align the demand and our response to what people want in the post-COVID era. So that's something that we'll be talking about. The other thing I wanted to mention is that myself and Councillor Kirsch will be meeting with the new Places for Leisure CEO early next week, to express our disappointment with how they've approached negotiations. We'd want a more balanced approach. We understand the sort of the commercial imperatives, but there are community imperatives as well. So, we are being proactive and meeting with their senior leaders to express our disappointment and to expedite a response so that we can open up as soon as we possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there are no other councillors who wish to speak, I suggest that if you would like a vote, you put your name in the chat function. Otherwise, we will take this as a unanimous decision. I am taking it that it is unanimous. and that those proposals have been approved. So we now reach item 13 on the agenda, which is the committee appointments. This is really a matter for noting. So unless anyone wishes to speak, I will take it that that has been noted. Thank you. As there are no urgent items authorised by the chair, that concludes the business of the evening. The time is 21:30, so 6:30.